debate. The honourable member for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the colleague from Caribou Prince George for his passionate speech. It's always hard to follow him up in this House. But first off, Madam Speaker, I want to thank my constituents. I think I can honestly say for all MPs in the House, the last 2 weeks we've likely received more correspondence than any other 2-week period at least in the last number of years on a number of these issues, and it's been a trying 2 years. But I want to thank my constituents, Madam Speaker, because they've made it crystal clear that they don't support the invocation and the continued use of the Emergencies Act. There has been a balanced feedback on this one, but the majority clearly have indicated in my riding they don't support the Liberal government's decision. I want to make it crystal clear, I will always support the democratic right of Canadians to protest. I'm on the record before this convoy ever arrived here in Ottawa that I will always support, no matter what the issue is on the political spectrum, the right of Canadians to democratically protest. However, I'm on the record, I never will support people breaking the law. I do belong to the party of law and order, and I'm on the record stating that I will never support anyone breaking the law. And that includes for blockades, it includes for anything. Now, Madam Speaker, I'm going to leave my, really focus here on my Liberal colleagues and the NDP for my speech, because I think I know how the majority of the Conservative and Bloc members are going to vote, and based on now the indication that this is possibly a confidence vote, maybe my words will be for naught. But I really want to get into the crux of the issue that I think we're really voting on tonight, and that's the continuation of the invocation of the Emergency Act. Not the history or why they did it, but really, why do we still need it going forward? There's been some great speeches here in the House already, Madam Speaker, that clearly outline why people on both sides think that it was justified or not for bringing it forward. But I really want to focus on the question of why we need it going forward, and lacking that why, the question of trust. So the justification, Madam Speaker, just to cover that briefly. I've read all the table documents here that were provided to us as members of Parliament, the stuff that's been put out in the public sphere to read. I've tried to listen in particular to either read or listen every speech given by a Liberal member, but specifically the Liberal cabinet, the Liberal government, because they're the ones that are really should be speaking more than any of the rest of us in the House during this debate, trying to convince us why implementing arguably the most draconian, powerful piece of legislation that exists in our federal laws. I don't think there's anything more powerful than the Emergencies Act when it comes to taking this, putting it into place, and actually curtailing some of the freedoms that do exist in this great country. What are the justifications that's been tabled so far? If you read through what's the proclamation, it really hits at kind of 2 key points if you read through it. It talks about freezing of financial assets, and it talks about tow trucks. Well, Madam Speaker, I've been involved in dealing with sort of, I would argue, crisis, national crisis, not necessarily here for Canada, but around the world. I kind of understand what serious national security threats are, maybe more than most, and I've never felt personally that anything that has occurred across Canada over the last 3 weeks dealing with the blockades or the convoy here in Ottawa have ever met that threshold. But don't take my word for it, Madam Speaker. There have been experts that have been out there. I think the member of Halton Hills, Wellington Halton Hills, just laid out in his speech a few hours earlier a clear logic that the government has failed to meet the legal requirements to invoke the Act. However, they chose to do it anyway. But let's leave it. Let's make the assumption, Madam Speaker, that this justification was valid for bringing in the invocation, that it did somehow meet the national emergency threshold. Was this because the Cabinet has been hinted at had access to additional intelligence or information that warranted that? How did the government communicate that to Canadians, but to the rest of us here in the House of Commons with this important vote coming out? Did they reach out, ask to share that information? There's many of us in this House, Madam Speaker, that have the appropriate security clearances, that have top secret security clearances, that are former members of the Privy Council. And all that being aside, Madam Speaker, you could quickly and quite easily read a number of members from all the parties in this House into the necessary security classification and provide that intelligence or information. Because lacking that, the Prime Minister, Madam Speaker, is really just asking us to trust him. I'll get back to the question of trust in a little bit, in a couple minutes, Madam Speaker. But as the Liberal member from Beaches East York laid out in his speech just a couple hours ago, and as I've already hinted at, the vote tonight is really about why is the Emergency Act still required and all these restrictive measures. I feel personally a responsible government, even one that felt they were justified in using arguably this very powerful piece of legislation, would have revoked these measures as soon as all the illegal blockades disappeared. Why hasn't the Liberal government done this? I listened yesterday as the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, when he was asked this direct question on national media as to why the Emergency Act is still needed going forward when everything has been resolved, and his response, there's still work to be done, Madam Speaker. I stepped out of the chamber this morning to listen to the Prime Minister in his press conference when it was the first question that he was asked, and then he was asked it again specifically by a reporter to say, well, let's give us one specific example. Please give me one. His answer, Madam Speaker, tow trucks. So we're in a national emergency because somehow we need tow trucks to move. I don't know what, Madam Speaker, because I've been driving in and out every day over the last 2 weeks into here to Parliament. There was lots of vehicles illegally blockading the roads, needed to be towed out there. They're all gone. I had no issues coming into Parliament Hill this morning. But what disturbed me and actually disappointed me, Madam Speaker, a little bit as well during that press conference, the Prime Minister was asked a couple other very easy questions. What lessons did he learn from the last few weeks? Know what his response was? The country is angry. I don't know, Madam Speaker, if that's really learning much of anything. He was asked, does he have any regrets? A sign of a good leader is recognizing that they're not perfect. I know I've made plenty of mistakes throughout my military career, and I'm sure even as a politician in the last couple years. The key to learning from them is to actually recognizing when you've made a mistake. That's when you learn most, and you should have regrets if you didn't do things to the best of your ability. So what does this all mean going forward when we still see the government continuing to support the emergency measures? Does this mean because they just want to go after those Canadians that maybe happen to donate to their local neighbor, the truck driver that might have been even fully vaccinated? Because I know I had constituents of my riding that came here for the protests, fully vaccinated. I actually had one of my best friends, I didn't even realize he came. He drove here with his wife and kids from British Columbia, protested completely legally, and then went home. Drove all the way back. Didn't blockade, nothing, didn't do anything. But because they made that $20 donation, are they at risk? Is that why we still need these measures going forward? I have constituents reach out to me this morning saying, pulling all my money out of the banks. I'm putting it all either in my mattress, I'm doing whatever. I do not trust the government. So if these risks still exist, Madam Speaker, I do encourage the government to take the necessary steps to reach out and share those. Because I think it's safe to say the Prime Minister has broken the trust. Canadians no longer trust him. So regardless of where we are on this issue, let's work together to build that trust. So I'm asking the Liberal government to share that information, make it available. If they really feel that there's a threat out there that still needs to be addressed, bring it forward. So in conclusion, Madam Speaker, as lawyers and the Liberal MPs from Louis-Hébert and Beaches East York just stated in their speeches in the last few hours, the threshold has not been met. The only reason they're voting tonight in favor of this is because the Prime Minister would rather have a federal election than accept that maybe he didn't make the right decision. Tonight, Madam Speaker, I'll be voting to revoke the Emergencies Act.
Yeah.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I've listened intently to the member opposite, and I want to point out something that we've heard repeatedly during the course of these past 4 days from the Conservative benches, such as that other steps were not taken prior to invoking this very significant piece of legislation. That is categorically false, Madam Speaker. A table was convened of all leadership at multiple levels. The RCMP officers were deputized. Ottawa declared a state of emergency. The province of Ontario declared a state of emergency. Funds were targeted using conventional methods. Cryptocurrency was then being used by the illegal protesters, thus triggering the need to employ FinTrack. And I'm going to address FinTrack in my question to the member opposite. Thus far, according to the reading that I've done this morning on my way here, 206 accounts have been frozen among tens of thousands of people in 2 countries who have donated to these illegal blockades. Isn't, in fact, that demonstrating the restraint that is being shown in terms of the surgical targeting of those who are largely funding this with improper donations, including donations from foreign jurisdictions? Isn't that exactly what we should be doing to cut off the supply chain to this illegal blockade?
Honourable Member, order. The Honourable Member from Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. I would correct my Liberal colleague. If he goes back and listens to my speech, I never actually made any of those allegations that that there wasn't justification or steps. There have been speeches that have made that, but that was not part of my speech. With respect to his comment, if there's only been 263 accounts so far frozen, and that he's saying isn't that a good sign of restraint, I'd agree with him.
Questions and comments.
The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Madam Speaker, the Liberals have told us that adopting the Emergencies Act, version 1998, is not abusive because there are safeguards in terms of our examination of this as legislators. But the Prime Minister has perverted the examination we need to do as legislators, and he's hiding from his own members his true intent. Can he not accept that the Prime Minister has clearly lacked leadership?
That's an excellent question.
That is an excellent question, Madam Speaker. I agree entirely with my honourable colleague.
Lack of leadership. The whole purpose of the Emergencies Act is really that case of last resort, Madam Speaker. We shouldn't be utilizing it without absolute concern, restraint, and not doing it. And we need to have the oversight. In fact, that's why we have the Emergencies Act. Why it morphed and evolved from the former War Measures Act was because there was a recognition we needed that democratic oversight of this House. We have all these tools in place, Madam Speaker, in order to, through the Parliamentary Review Committee that can table and review the revocation within 7 days, we can get to the bottom of all this. And I am personally disappointed that the Prime Minister has made this a confidence vote.
The Honourable Member for Courtenay Albany.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And first, I want to thank my colleague for his speech and of course, on behalf of all Canadians, for his service to our country. Madam Speaker, I mean, we're supporting this reluctantly. We've made it very clear. But we've also heard from members of the Conservative Party, Doug Ford, himself a Conservative, the Premier of Ontario, Peter MacKay, the former Defence Minister, the former Minister of Justice under the Stephen Harper government, Stephen Harper's own security advisor, Richard Fadden, who all believe that this meets the bar and this is the right use of the Act, given the scope of the Act that's we're talking about today. Does he not believe that they're qualified and those experts? And does he, what does he say to those Conservatives that support in calling for us to actually move forward with tonight's vote and voting for it?
Member for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. Thanks,
Madam Speaker. Well, look, every Canadian should have an opinion on this, and I fully respect their opinion. And you know what? Maybe they're right that it was necessary. That's their opinion. But I would push back that calling for it when it was needed to get rid of the blockades here in Ottawa that was still existing, that's not what we're voting tonight, Madam Speaker. We're voting, does it still need to be in place? And I'm not aware of a single protest or threat in this country that still requires the most restrictive, powerful legislation in this country.
Reprise du débat.